Thank you very much for coming. I heard we are sold out within 10 seconds, something like that, so that's very good. And you all know what we are talking about today, but to give you a short introduction, just let us see a little glimpse of the show.
You want to cook crystal meth?
That's right.
This is art, Mr. White.
Actually, it's just basic chemistry.
How did a public school teacher become public enemy #1?
I am the one who knocks.
Witness Walter White's transformation, Breaking Bad.
Your new lab. I do believe that there's a hell.
Yes. So I'm very honored to welcome Vince Gilligan on stage. He's the man.
Hey. Nice to see you. Good to see you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So I'm very glad you made it here. You spent, is it the first time in Berlin?
This is my first time in Germany ever, and first time in Berlin. So, guten Abend und Dankeschön.
Oh, you learn.
That's all I know. But thank you very much for having me. It's a wonderful city. I'm having a real good time here.
So you did a touristic program?
I did. A couple days ago, got driven around and saw a great many sights, and really just an amazing city. I'm definitely coming back in the future to visit.
Okay, and I hope you will come here again.
Absolutely. Oh,
okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We take you for granted. So we are in episode 2 of the final season. 6 episodes more to go.
Yes.
This is, of course, not a spoiler program today.
Right.
But will you give us, to sort of come through the next weeks, will you give us some sort of a little hint?
Well, really, this final season more than any, I really find that a lot of people ask me what's going to happen, and then I start to open my mouth to make a joke. And they say, no, don't tell me. So what can I say that wouldn't make anyone unhappy, me included? If you've seen the first 2 episodes, I think you're going to see that you're going to have the 3rd one available to watch tonight, and I believe that's the way it works here. And it's just, you can see from these first 2 that things are moving faster than they normally do on Breaking Bad. You can expect a real roller coaster ride from now until the end of the series. So I would say have a seat belt attached to your sofa, and put it very tight, because it's going to be a wild ride.
Okay, no more spoilers.
No, that's the best I can do.
So is Marie still wearing purple in the last episode?
She
might.
I can't.
Okay, let's stop it here. So how is it? Because you started in 2008.
Yeah.
It's 5 years now.
Yeah.
So how's the feeling bringing it to an end? It must be horrible.
It is, and actually, it's for the amount of time. It's actually closer to 6 years. I think we started shooting in March of 2007. Started shooting the pilot, and it's been quite a ride. It's been quite a long time, and I'm very sad personally that it already has for me come to an end, because I miss these wonderful people in front of the lens and behind it, whom I've worked with for so many years now. But creatively, I really do think it was time to bring the show to a conclusion, and I hope you agree when you see the final, when you've seen it all, when you see the final episodes. I hope you agree with that assessment.
So is writing an end more difficult than writing probably second season or third, because you need to bring everything together?
Yeah, you sure do. Writing endings are very hard. They've always been hard for me back when I would write movie scripts. Endings are very difficult because our lives, our realities, it seems to me, don't lend themselves to very neat, tidy endings. Life goes on until one day when it no longer goes on, in our realities. But in our fictions, we hope for a satisfying conclusion to a story. And coming up with the proper and satisfying conclusion is oftentimes not that easy. And my 6 writers and I worked very hard to come up with the ending that you will see in not too long in the future. And I spent a lot of sleepless nights the past year worrying that it wasn't good enough. I feel good about it now. I hope I will not be very badly surprised when the final one does air. But it satisfied us as the 7 of us, the 7 writers. It satisfied us as the first fans of the show, and hopefully most. I don't think it's ever possible to satisfy 100% of the viewers. I think certain folks, no matter what, will say, "Well, I had this platonic, perfect ending in my brain, and you failed. You fell short of that." But hopefully, by and large, most folks will dig it.
I read somewhere that one of the episodes, the script of one of the episodes, was actually stolen from Bryan Cranston's car.
Yeah.
So this is a hell of a nightmare in shooting the final season.
It was a big nightmare. I'm trying to remember which one it was. It was. I think it's one that's already aired. I think it was one of the first 3. I believe. It was certainly not the very last episode, but Bryan.
Thank God.
Well, yeah, thank goodness. Yeah, it wasn't even written at that point, to be honest. But Bryan Cranston, being a producer on the show, was being a very good producer, and he was spending his Sunday in Albuquerque, helping to find locations for us. And he had driven to the top of Sandia Crest, which is the mountain on the east side of Albuquerque, New Mexico, that overlooks the entire city. And he was up there in this beautiful not a national park, but like a local park, and he went off to take some pictures, and he came back, and his window of his car had been broken, and his iPad, his wonderful Apple product, had been stolen. And and then some guy in some strip club in Albuquerque a few weeks later was caught trying to sell this script to...
In a strip club?
Yes, the guy who stole the script in a strip club in Albuquerque was saying, "Hey, how much will you give me for this? I think it's got to be worth something." And the police were called, and luckily the guy he was trying to sell it to was a man of conscience. So he had no
internet access, so to put it on the internet.
He apparently it never, as far as we know, it never got on the internet. I think we would know by now. And as I say, at this point, it's probably moot, because I think, as far as I recall, it's one of the first 3. So.
You said very early that this final season will be the end, so after 5 episodes, or 5 seasons. Is there a normal sort of ending towards every story which is around a season 5? Or why did you came so early with the idea that it will end at that time?
We know that by design, Breaking Bad was a very closed-ended and finite story, and that is a bit atypical for television. Typically, the economics of television reward you for going on indefinitely, for going on forever, essentially. And you can make a lot of money by creating a show that goes 10, 12, 15 years. That's what most TV producers hope for. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I'm not against that. But Breaking Bad, from its very conception, was designed to be different. It was designed to be a bit experimental. It was designed to tell a story of change, of metamorphosis. And typically, the leading character in your TV show doesn't change at all for 5 or 10 or 15 years, and that's by design. You want to know when you tune in to see this to Marshall Dillon or Hawkeye Pierce or whoever you want to, or Thomas Magnum. You want to see the same guy in season 8 that you saw in season 1. But I really wanted to try something different. So the whole point of this show was taking the good guy, the protagonist, turning him into the bad guy, the antagonist. And at a certain point, you start to ask yourself, as the writer, how bad can bad be? And you say
really
to yourself,
bad,
really bad apparently is the answer, as we've seen thus far. And so at a certain point, you say to yourself, if we're going to be true to the very design of this project and not try to milk it for all it's worth financially, we should end it sooner rather than later.
So do you remember the beginning, when you first pitched it?
Yeah.
Because probably for all Germans here in the room, to go to a TV representative from Germany and tell them, I plan a program about someone who's a teacher and has cancer and is trying to cook meth.
Yeah.
They will immediately stop the conversation, so there will never ever a program like this in Germany, probably somewhere in the future. So how was the reaction?
The reaction was not that different than it would be in Germany. It was I pitched it first you have to find a studio to buy your project, and so I went to Sony Television because I knew the two gentlemen who run that company, who basically buy all the TV shows. A gentleman named Zach Van Amberg and a gentleman named Jamie Ehrlicht. And I went to them and I said, I got an idea for you. And I was very excited. This idea had kind of popped into my head. Ideas don't usually pop into one's head as a writer, at least in my experience. They're usually more hard fought. But I had this idea I was very excited about, and I sit down with these two guys in their office in Culver City in California, and I start to pitch it, and they both are like this the whole time. You know, they look deer in the headlights, and as they're, you know, like kind of back in their seats, kind of thinking, what the heck, I started to get the sense that maybe I hadn't thought this through well enough, that this would not be a very easy sell. I was just going on sheer enthusiasm and excitement. But despite the fact they looked a little aghast, they called me within a day or two, and they said, we are interested. And thus I had a studio partner. And then the three of us together had to go and find a broadcaster, a network, you know, on whose airways, you know, where we could show the show, you know, where we could broadcast it. Sorry, I suddenly lost the ability to speak. But anyway, that was a little harder. We went through a lot of different cable operations in the States who ultimately passed until luckily AMC said yes. Mm-hmm.
So how much impact do the actors actually have on the process of the developing of the story? Of course, because they sort of talk to you, they're in the program, but especially with these two main characters, I got the feeling that they sort of gave more to this. So when the first season starts, I think you wanted to throw Jesse out of the program, and so he must have done something to still be there.
No, you're right. It is true. My original idea was to kill off Jesse at the end of the first season. And
thank God you didn't.
I know. I can tell. That's a very bad idea, right?
Bad one.
Very bad idea. To my credit, I didn't keep that idea very long once we cast Aaron Paul. I actually told him on the set of the first episode after the pilot, or maybe it was the second episode, but I said to him, hey, come here, sit down, I want to tell you something. I was going to kill your character off at the end of this season. And he said, what? And his eyes got real big. And I said, no, this is I'm doing you, this is a good thing. I'm paying you a compliment. I'm saying I would never do that now. But actually, I scared him very badly. When he wasn't thinking in terms of the character dying ever, but I was actually trying to be complimentary. And then after that point, Bryan Cranston was very devilish, was very mischievous from that point onward. Anytime Bryan Cranston would read a subsequent script before Aaron had had a chance to read it, he'd close it up, and he'd go over to Aaron, and he'd massage his shoulders, and he'd say, it was great working with you, buddy. And he was merciless, and it was so much fun for him to play those kind of pranks on Aaron, because Aaron is very, you know, he did that quite a few times.
That's a good job for an actor. So did you throw out, sort of working on that, did you sort of change your kind of writing about Walt? Because when you see the face of Bryan Cranston, he's not a very talkative guy. So did you throw out dialogues or stuff like that when writing his
interesting,
character?
Walt can be somewhat taciturn, but Bryan Cranston is very much a talkative gentleman. Bryan Cranston, it should be noted, I think you all know this, what a fine actor he is, but if you were fortunate to meet him and get to talk with him, you would realize even more what a wonderful actor he is, just as you would with all these actors. For instance, another example would be Giancarlo Esposito, who played Gus Fring. These two gentlemen in particular are completely different than their characters. If you met them in real life, in a sense, you wouldn't even recognize. It would take you a moment to recognize them because they come across completely differently. Like Gustavo Fring, for instance, the character is very, very taciturn and very, very polite and yet businesslike and somewhat severe, very, very self-contained. Giancarlo Esposito, when you meet him, is like, hey, and he gives you a big hug, and he's always smiling. He has this huge, goofy smile, and that shows what good acting can provide. And in answer to your question, a great deal of who the characters became did come from the actors. Sometimes in overt ways, sometimes, for instance, in the early days, Bryan Cranston said to me, how do you think Walt looks? And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I mean, I'm thinking, this was his idea. He said, I'm thinking of a little mustache, and I want to have the hair designer color it to take all the color out of it. I want it to look like a dead caterpillar on my upper lip. And I want to be a little gone to seed. I want to be a little fleshy. I'm thinking Walt should be 186 pounds. And I said, 186? He says, yeah. He knew, much like a boxer who comes in at a specific fighting weight. Brian said to me, I think 186 is the right weight for Walt because I want to have a little of that muffin top. You know, when I'm wearing the tighty whities, I want some flesh sagging over the waistband. And he showed up within a pound of that weight, I think. So a lot of that is overt. A lot of those details overtly come from the actor, and sometimes they're implied by the actor. Sometimes they are. What's the right way to put it? They're almost subconsciously added by the writer based on what the writer understands of the actor. Like, for instance, Dean Norris, who plays Hank, when I originally wrote the part, he was written to be, there was not a lot of depth to the character, to be honest, in the first script. He was just sort of a hail fellow well met. He was essentially everything that Walt was not, but there wasn't much more to him other than that. But when I got to know Dean Norris, who plays the part, and I realized how complex a person he is and how educated he is and how there's a great depth of feeling to him. A lot of that understanding that I gathered about him and that my writers gathered about him came to apply to the character. We, almost as if by osmosis, we learn things about these actors and we incorporate them into the writing and into the characters. Mm-hmm.
You said at the beginning that it's basically, besides everything else, it's the protagonist becoming an antagonist. And so we have it for the whole seasons. We see Walter transform to Heisenberg or whatever. And I think for me, because I saw it, of course, in the last few days again, there's this little turning point, or one of the turning points is, I think it's the end of season 2 when Jane dies because on her own vomit and he doesn't do anything. Yeah. So would you agree that this is some sort of an extra turning to become more Heisenberg than ever before? Very
much so. It was tricky to know how quickly to turn our good guy into our bad guy. It was one of the trickiest things about writing a show like this was to know how quickly it should come to pass. Should Walt take little baby steps toward evil, toward criminality, or should he do it in fits and starts? And that was a big moment. That was one of the rare moments that the studio and the network called me up. We would do an outline for every episode, about 12 to 14 pages long, with a great amount of detail before we would write the scripts. And they read that outline and they saw that moment and they said, to their credit, they were courageous throughout the whole 6 years of production. That was the one time they said, we're a little scared of this. And to their credit, they said, we understand that Walt will get to this point eventually, but we think you may be taking him too far too quickly, making him too bad too quickly. And they had a good point. And actually my writers, and even we were all worried, we were concerned. But at the end of the day, it felt right in our guts to have that scene at that moment. And that was a big moment that people remember. And it was a very hard moment to watch. I was lucky enough to be on the set and watch from about 8 feet away as Brian played that part, and he was so wonderful. I don't even think every nuance in his acting, in his expression, was completely caught by the motion picture camera. I think I saw things the way I remember it is I saw things that never even showed up on film. But he was marvelous in that scene.
In this show, drama does not only work in the show, but also within the audience, because strangely somehow, even in the final season, you still like Walt. So he's some sort of an existential hero somehow, even if he's a really bad guy.
It's I'm sure there are. I think it's marvelous. I'm surprised by how many people still root for Walt. I don't know that everybody does, but hopefully even for the fans for whom Walt has lost all sympathy, hopefully he has what he has lost in sympathy, he has gained in interest. Hopefully he's more interesting than ever for his lack of sympathetic behavior. But some people do indeed still root for him. My mother, who I don't believe for a minute would watch this show if I hadn't created it.
Okay.
Nonetheless, because she's very, very much believes in law and order and is very, thinks one should behave right and think right and do right. I don't mean that in a bad way. That's the way moms are, But she called me up after one of these previous episodes, not the one you're going to see tonight, but the last one, the one prior to this, and she said, I was nervous when Skyler was talking to Hank. I was blurting out to the TV screen, don't tell him about Walt. Don't be a stoolie, And it's interesting, my own mom still rooting for this guy, because in a sense, I have lost more sympathy for Walt than I think most fans still possess. And I find that very interesting. And fans are not wrong for still rooting for Walt. Not at all. It's interesting. It's been a very interesting sociological education for me, seeing how people interact with the show and react to it.
Besides the great show, it's also the details, the very complex details in every episode, and of course in the seasons, just to name one, the colors. So I just checked it on the internet. You can see people sort of giving every outfit in every episode like a color, and you see sort of this scale of colors, and they're trying to find something out of it. Yeah. So you did put a lot of effort in the details. We did.
We always put as much effort as we could muster into the details, and the color is a good example of that. We did pay a lot of attention to color, but probably there are some wonderful theories as to what the colors mean out there on the internet that would have never occurred to me necessarily.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean they're wrong. I mean, this sounds, I don't know how this may sound, but I really do believe that once we make this show, it's ours as we make it, and then we put it out in the world, and then it's yours. I mean, and then we only are one opinion amongst many. And if someone has an opinion about what the colors mean, I would never think of saying, no, you're wrong. I would say, that's very interesting. Maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe on some subconscious level we were thinking that. I can tell you that consciously what we were thinking when we came up with these color palettes is that we were thinking this is a show about change and about transformation. And changing the color palette of any particular character for instance, on a microcosmic scale, in the pilot episode, Walt starts off very beige, very boring in his color palette, and by the end of that first hour, he turns green. His clothing he's got some hints of green, some hints, in other words, of vitality and life, and so every season we would map out a change in the color palette for each character, and the colors themselves didn't necessarily mean certain things to me, but rather the concept of showing change through this visual metaphor was helpful and was something that I enjoyed helping the production designer and the costume designer and the director of photography map out. And the one character who never changes seems to be Marie, who always has this fetish toward purple, and that was fun to have one character who remained just very defiantly constant.
So I have to ask you this because we were in Germany. It's not a coincidence that almost every character has some sort of a related German name, like Ermantraut, Schrader, Schwartz, Heisenberg.
Yeah.
So there's even Major Tom in the song of
Yeah,
Peter
that's
Schilling
right.
in the English version in the
That's right.
in season 4, I think. So where does it come from?
I'm not sure where that comes from. I could tell you Ermintrout is a last name of my girlfriend's good friend back in Virginia. It's her last name, so I wanted to make use of that. And what else? Heisenberg, of course. That was a bit of a throwaway when we came up with that. In an early episode in season 1, Walt is asked by Tuco, the character Tuco, what's your name? And of course he's going to give a fake name at that point. And as a throwaway, we thought Heisenberg would be an interesting fake name because of Werner Heisenberg, who ran Hitler's atomic bomb program and also who was famous for his uncertainty principle. That's about all I understand of it. I'm no physicist, but I like the sound of uncertainty on a poetic level. So we like that name. And then it really took on a life of its own. It really stuck, that name. So that was fun. Yeah, there do seem to be some Germanic overtones, and I don't know that they were all completely conscious, but maybe on some subconscious level we were thinking that way.
So before you can ask him questions, one last question. Now it's over. So we are not done, but you are done.
Yeah.
So will you ever write for movies again after having the chance to sort of develop such a big thing in a show?
That's a very good question. I love movies. I've always loved movies. I don't love the era we are in, unfortunately, certainly in the United States as far as movies go. Unfortunately, the movie business in the United States has aggregated. What used to be many production companies, many studios, have been swallowed up and aggregated down into just a few companies now. And unfortunately, listen, it was always a business. It was always about making money. But now it's that more than it's ever been. And unfortunately, there's not that much new thinking as far as movies go. And unfortunately, a lot of movies are superhero movies, of which I am guilty of having written one, and then a lot of sequels, and a lot of movies for a very specific demographic, a very specific male demographic. And I think they should make all those kind of movies. I think that's wonderful. But I think they should also make movies for every other demographic, and they should make movies for grown-ups. And I want to see, as well as, I mean...
We keep that as a quote. Make movies for grown-ups.
Well, I mean, they should make every kind of movie. And luckily now, for people like myself working in television, now there are more, in the United States and hopefully all over the world, there are more outlets, there are more places that show television now, and therefore television needs more shows than ever. So television, or the television universe, the number of outlets for television, that universe is expanding while the motion picture universe is simultaneously contracting. And I would like to see, this is a very long-winded answer. The short answer is I'd like to make a movie, but not if it has to be, some movie with a very high Roman numeral attached to it, or I'd like to make something that interests me on a level that Breaking Bad interests me. Having said all of that, I should probably just stick with TV because it's been very good to me. It's been very good to me. The one thing about TV is that it's exhausting. And I've only worked on Breaking Bad for the past 6 years. I haven't had a chance to work on anything else. And I'm so proud of Breaking Bad, but I'd like to get a few more projects going. And when you do a movie, it's a bit more finite. It doesn't grind you down like TV does, physically. But I'd like to do both in the future.
Yeah, we hope you do.
Oh, thank you.
So it's up to you now. Do you have any questions?
I would like to know, what were your feelings when you wrote the last sentences of the script?
Good question. I was very sad. I hate to admit it because I'm a manly man, but I actually teared up and cried when I wrote the very last wrote the very last words of the final episode. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in this little condo that I have there. That's actually appeared on the show as a set. And I was sitting at the dining room table and typing away, and I was very moved. I was not moved by the brilliance of the words I was writing. I was moved by the fact that it was over, that was it. And it made me very sad to think I would never write the end again on Breaking Bad. It made me very sad, and I was very touched by it.
Oli would like to know, what was the biggest challenge writing the whole series for you?
The biggest single challenge of writing the whole series? It's a good question. Mapping it out so that we knew, creating the proportions of the show. In other words, the idea was to take a good man and turn him bad. Knowing how quickly to turn him bad was tricky, and we were operating in the dark very often. My writers and I were not sure how quickly, as I told with that previous story about Jane's death, none of us were that sure how quickly to make him bad, because you have this eternal tension. You want to keep the audience interested. You want to give the audience enough to remain interested so that they don't go click and turn the channel. But at the same time, you want to do things slowly enough. You want to unravel the story slowly enough that you have an opportunity to go many seasons, go 3 or 4 or 5 seasons. So that was always a very tricky thing to figure out.
So, any more questions?
Hello, I have a question about the initial idea that popped up in your head as you described it. From there to the first pitch, what was the initial idea and how did it develop to the first pitch?
It's always hard to pin down where ideas come from, but I remember the exact moment when the idea for Breaking Bad hit me. I was on a phone call in 2004 to a friend of mine, another good German name, Schnauz, a gentleman named Tom Schnauz.
No coincidence.
Or mustache, right? Schnauz. And
Schnauzer, yeah.
Yeah. And he is one of my oldest friends. I went to NYU film school with him. And he worked with me as a writer on The X-Files. And this was about 2 years after The X-Files ended. And we were bemoaning our sad state of unemployment at that moment. We were hoping for a good writing job. We weren't sure where it would arise from. And we were trying to figure out what else we could do for a living in the meantime. And we realized very quickly we had no usable skills for anything else. But he had read an article in the New York Times about some children who had been made sick by a meth lab that their mother had put in the bathroom of their apartment in New York City. A very terrible thing. And he has a very twisted sense of humor. As you've seen probably, because he is a writer and a director on Breaking Bad. And he, for instance, he wrote and directed the episode in which Mike Ehrmantraut was killed. He's a very talented writer and director. But he made the joke to me, why don't we put a meth lab in the back of an RV and drive around America and make money? And in that moment that he made that joke, I was fascinated by a character who would do such a thing. And suddenly that idea really, there was that sort of a eureka moment, which they don't come that often for writers, unfortunately, at least not for me. But in that moment I thought, that would be an interesting character to write about, and that's where it all sprang from. Anyway, yeah.
Okay, more questions. Maybe from the left side, in the back.
Yeah, hi. I guess my question is, Breaking Bad is a very technical program, especially if you think about the chemistry. How often did science or chemistry get in your way of your ideas or your visions that you had, and how often did you have to change the plot due to that?
Well, I hate to admit, I am no scientist. I never took a chemistry class in my life, and we had a lot of good help. We had a woman named Dr. Donna Nelson who presented herself to us after season 1 and said, I can be, if you want me to, I can be of help vetting the chemistry that you have on the show, and she was very helpful in that regard. Before we had her help, we had a couple of highlight moments in that first season that I have since found out to be less than scientifically accurate. But there's a show, I don't know if you're familiar with it in Germany, but there's a show called Mythbusters. There's an American show. And I was very fortunate to have been a guest on it along with Aaron Paul back in October. And the episode just aired a couple of weeks ago. And I think you can probably find it on the internet. But in it, the two Mythbusters, these two gentlemen, they test the truths or the untruth of certain popular myths. And they did a Breaking Bad episode, and in it they tested the mercury fulminate that Walt uses on Tuco in his office, and they also tested, could you indeed dissolve a body with hydrofluoric acid, and would it eat through a porcelain tub? And it's a very nauseating episode to watch because they used a pig carcass, and they put it all kinds of awful chemicals, and then they shot a time lapse of it being it's just nasty. But both those myths were unfortunately busted. They said basically the way we wrote it would never work. But what are you going to do? So.
It's fiction. So probably one last question.
Hi. You said you experimented a lot, and you didn't do broadcasting in the sense, as I understand it. It was rather narrowcasting or something. And I would be interested in how much influence the money givers had on you, or how much freedom did you have during the production in terms of hierarchy and influence on the production itself?
We were very fortunate. Breaking Bad started up at the right time and in the right place. I was a bit cynical when I started pitching Breaking Bad around to different people, because the experience I've had, I've been working as a professional writer in Hollywood and movies for about 20 years, and then in television for a little more than 15 years, 16, something like that. And my experience in both fields was that the first meeting is always the kindest, in which the executive shakes your hand and says, I love your work, and I love this script, and we're going to make it just as it's written, and it's wonderful, and it's beautiful. And then the second meeting, and then from then onward, begins the death by 1,000 cuts, in which they change, they nibble away like with a pair of scissors at your script, and they file off all the sharp edges, if you want to use that metaphor. And I was afraid with a show as crazy and as edgy as Breaking Bad, that when AMC finally came along and said, we want to make this show, I was afraid that they didn't really know what they were talking about, or they didn't really know what they were getting themselves into. And I was always waiting, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop, and for them to reveal that they really wanted a whole different show than what I wanted to give them. And luckily that moment, that shoe never dropped, that moment never came. And AMC, our network, and Sony, our studio, both of them were very courageous, and they really, for better or for worse, they let me do the show that I wanted to do, and they were very unobtrusive in terms of their notes. They would give notes on each script as it came in, and most of the time they're excellent notes, and very often they help make the show better, but there weren't that many of them, and also there's sort of a gentleman's agreement between us that if I thought a note really would not help that particular episode, I could not use it. I could ignore it. Mm-hmm. And that was a wonderful thing. That was a real blessing. And I always felt a great sense of responsibility to them for giving me that freedom. I felt responsible to, in turn, give them the best TV show I could humanly give them. And that worked very well. I would like to see that happen more often in network television, certainly in the United States. I would like to see the end, and in movies as well, the end of that death by 1,000 cuts process. That would be a good thing, I think.
Yeah, and the success proved you and them right at the end. So
well, and if you buy a script, it stands to reason if you're going to spend a lot of money on a script, it ought to be a good one. Otherwise, don't buy it. But the strange way that the system works over there typically, at least for the past however many decades, is they buy it and then they proceed to rewrite it from the ground up, and then they hire a bunch of other writers to rewrite it, and then they hire writers to rewrite those writers. I'm talking more about movies, I guess, and TV shows, but it's an odd system that seems counterintuitive. It doesn't make a lot of logical sense to me. So,
but hopefully you will come back with another thing, such as Breaking Bad. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you, folks, for being here. Dankeschön. Thank you.